Before the show starts, this is a reminder to all our listeners that the podcast is an open discussion forum and not meant to be used as a source of direct professional help. We at Panic Stations UK would always urge anybody listening to go seek advice from their GP, that is their doctor, a counsellor or a therapist. The podcast is, however, a place for people to share experiences and realise that you are not alone. Due to the subject matter discussed in the shows, some episodes may have explicit language in. I warn listeners, as this is meant to be a realistic look at mental health. As such, you may find that some of the guests use some pretty colourful language. I ask all listeners just to freely accept this and to honour the guests that are on the show. It's their journey and it's their freedom of speech, and we at Panic Stations UK would never do anything to discourage that. Many thanks and enjoy the show. Hello, welcome back everybody. As I promised, here is the next episode. Really quickly, for you it'd have been a couple of days. In our time, we've basically only been away for about half an hour, so I could eat me breakfast, stroke me lunch, and we could have a bit of a refreshment. Unfortunately, I've covered myself in bean juice, which is even more utterly bizarre. So anyway, as we were saying before, with our previous podcast, we were discussing about the fact that we were discussing about anxiety, and we were discussing about the cycles of anxiety. One of the things I was about to suggest with Danny, because he's still here as well.
Hello.
See, one of the things I was going to suggest was perhaps talking about worst panic attacks, and like it's perhaps a top 5 worst panic attacks and top 5 panic attacks which you've managed to control, and perhaps analyse the situation of each one, about why you managed to control it and why what started the scenario off the other time. So I mean, if you want to go, okay. give us your top 5 worst panic attacks, if you can.
Probably, I think the worst one that I've ever experienced, starting at number 1, would be the very first one that I had, going back to the previous episode when I was talking about having panic attacks on the aircraft on the way to Florida. Mm-hmm. The very first one that I had
on the bus,
on the aircraft itself.
Oh, on the aircraft. Okay.
And what had happened was we just sort of finished taxiing around the runway and what have you, and everyone was excited, and at that point I was kind of nervous, but it wasn't too bad. And then, as someone who's actually been on the plane, you know that moment when the engines kick in and there's that sudden jolt. I think it's some sort of mild G-force or something that you feel.
It's a burst of acceleration, isn't it? Yeah.
And at that point I got simultaneous nausea and vertigo.
Oh God!
At that same moment, that was it. It was literally a full-on 3/4 of an hour major attack. Probably the worst that I've ever had, as I said. Because at that point, I think it kicked in. You can't get off now.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's when it suddenly dawns on you.
I'm stuck now. I'm gonna have to just deal with it.
Exactly. And I literally thought I was going to throw up at that point. Which was always a major thing for me in my panic attacks. It wasn't I'm going to have a heart attack. It wasn't I can't breathe. It was I'm going to throw my guts up. So that was probably the worst one.
How did you come out of that situation? What helped?
Nothing at that point, because I was too far in the grip of the anxiety issues. Which is why I think in that on that trip, that's why there were repeated ones in that situation, because I wasn't fully coming out of them between each one.
Right.
Because there was nowhere to go to decompress, to calm down, and we'd been seated right next to the toilets as well, so there were people crowding round, especially sort of after meals and what have you.
Oh God.
And then if that wasn't bad enough, we hit the tail end of a hurricane on the way over, so there was a lot of turbulence, a lot of shuddering and dropping and this, that and the other, which only exacerbated the situation.
Yeah.
So instead of, if you think about anxiety as like a graph scale with like a flat line being your base temperament or your base anxiety level, and a panic attack, say, being a spike on that graph, instead of going up and then coming back down to a base level, I was probably only coming sort of halfway down, which really just left me primed for more attacks.
Eesh.
Yeah, if I remember rightly, I went that entire 7 hours and didn't eat a thing.
Was there anything that helped? Like, because obviously, you said you had several panic attacks, didn't you, during that flight? So obviously they subsided, and then they carried. Then another one happened, and then were there any moments of calm?
In that 7 hours, no, actually, there probably wasn't. I was on edge constantly, because there was always that awareness that you're, as I said, in a tin can several thousand feet above the ground. There is no way that I could get out of it.
And was there anything that I don't know? I mean, like, when, I don't know about you, but when I've had a full blown panic attack, I want to run around like a headless chicken. I mean, did you just sit there and deal with it, or?
Yeah, no, there wasn't really anywhere that I could go, because I felt that if I got up and say wanted to go to the toilet, as in a normal situation, you might sort of go, well, I'm just going to sort of go in the bathroom stall and just empty my head for a bit and just get out of this crowded situation.
Yeah,
but on a plane where you're sharing that single cubicle with 300-400 people, you can't do that, because there's going to be somebody knocking on that door within a couple of minutes. So even if you try and do that, even if you try and isolate yourself, there's still that pressure of get out because X number of people want to go in and use it when you're done.
Yeah.
Probably the closest that I got was at one point, one of the cabin crew said, look, if you really, really need it, you can sort of come down to our little galley area where it's a little bit quieter. And that helped a little bit, but still not a huge amount, because it's still quite open. So
yeah, of course, people can still walk past, and
yeah, absolutely.
You want people out of your face, don't you? When you
yeah, that's it. That's exactly what it was. So I almost go so far as to say that it was like a 7-hour panic attack with just varying degrees of panic.
That's, to be fair, that doesn't surprise me. I've had a 4.5-5 hour panic attack before.
Exactly.
It was the very first one I had. I've discussed that on the show prior.
So as you know, after that, you are exhausted.
Oh yeah. It's almost. Do you find? And it's going to sound really weird. First of all, as well, before I carry on, can I just apologise to any of the listeners going, "What the hell's going on?" Because in the background you might hear people talking or helicopters or God knows what. It's an exceptionally hot day, so I've got the window open. Unfortunately, there's not a great deal I can do. Obviously, as I've said in prior episodes, I do the podcast within my spare room. So the problem with that as well is obviously we have my little baby girl and my wife obviously in the background doing what they want to do in the house, and so obviously you'll get a few perhaps weird noises, so just bear with that anyway. Carrying on as I said, yeah, do you find that when you have your panic attack, it's almost in a really sick, twisted way, it's almost worth having them for the calm that you have afterwards, because you've burnt all that adrenaline off?
To a degree, yes. In fact, what that particular attack did, when I say attack, I am referring to that whole 7-hour period, is it allowed me, in a way, to get through the airport at the other end. And of course, as I'm sure you know, getting through the airport in the United States is no mean feat in itself.
Good God, no, yeah.
You know, and then getting on quite a small minibus, people carrier, whatever you want to call it, from the airport to the hotel. Those situations would normally set me off. But by that point, my brain and my body were completely spent. That, you know, I was walking through in a daze. That, you know, nothing else was going to faze me after that. So in a way, yeah, I suppose that was sort of a benefit. Granted, it was a benefit that I would have happily given up at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my number one, I think, worst panic attack. The others that I've had have pretty much been around about the same level. I'd have to probably grade them according to inconvenience more than severity. Sticking with the time that we were in Florida, they became very inconvenient to the point where, for example, we had 5-day passes for the Disney parks.
Oh wow.
I don't know if you know, but if you want that, they're a couple of £100 each.
God.
You know, it's not cheap. And this was going back a few years now. I mean, the Disney parks are ridiculously expensive to get into. They just are. So it was about £400 worth of pass. We didn't get to use them once. Not once. We couldn't go because I could not physically get in the transportation from the hotel to go to the parks. Couldn't do it. It wasn't even an option. So that to me was what I'd consider to be a severe issue.
Yeah.
You know, because it really, really hindered what we could do on the holiday. And we tried to go to Universal Studios, which, as I'm sure most people know, is one of the other theme parks that you can go to in Florida. And we managed to go on one ride, and then we actually had to go home. You know, we got there first thing in the morning. We were back at the hotel by midday because I couldn't do anything, because I couldn't go on anything, couldn't experience any of these things that only a few years before I'd been able to go on and enjoy. So that's literally how crippling these anxiety attacks became. It was basically any situation whereby I was encased in a vehicle or strapped into something and couldn't get out. So it was almost like a claustrophobic thing. But at the same time, I would say that it wasn't that straightforward, because if I was, say, in a lift and I was there on my own, fine. Put another person in there and I would freak out.
Yeah.
Which, going back to what we said before, I think that's because then you have that extra layer of potential humiliation and shame, because then you have a witness, which actually used to make it worse rather than better. So any of the attacks that I had in Florida could potentially, you know, be in that top 5 easily. You know, when you walk about 3 miles in the Florida heat, and if you haven't experienced the Florida heat, it's difficult to describe just how oppressive it is. You know, it's knocking 100 with, you know, 90-95% humidity. It's horrific.
I don't know about you, but like when it comes to like heat, that's one of the things that set me off. If I have a panic attack in the winter, it's great, because if I go outside, the cold sort of slaps you out. If I'm really, really warm, I feel like I can't breathe, and if you can't breathe, that exacerbates everything.
Yeah, it definitely can do. And yeah, at the same time, I would walk that 3-4 miles to you know, another park, rather than get on a little sort of free shuttle trolley, which would take 10 minutes.
God.
Because that 10 minutes was just not worth it. and I couldn't go in the supermarkets there, which they weren't big, but if I couldn't see that door, if I wasn't 10 feet away from the front door, then I was tweaking and going half mental, just with the anxiety. So yeah, any of those you could put down to being in the top 5, because that 2-week period is probably the worst that the anxiety has ever been.
And then going back to what you were saying, and now I'm making an assumption here, Danny, so please, if I'm wrong, just say don't assume. You were saying before in our last episode, you have that shame. You end up feeling like embarrassed, and there's that shame, and again, all these negative emotions that swirls around. And I know that when I've done stuff, basically that it affects you in a really profound way. And I mean, like, obviously with the fact that it was essentially your honeymoon, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was belated, but yes, it was a honeymoon. Yeah.
So having those happen during the honeymoon, it's just you and Andy. I mean, obviously, did that exacerbate it as well? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've always got that thing in the back of your mind of, that this is supposed to be, in inverted commas, the happiest holiday that you've ever had.
Yeah.
Especially when you add into the fact that was Andy's first holiday abroad as well. So it was supposed to be a big deal. It was his first time abroad, and he was supposed to be going to Disney World and all these things. And then you kind of think, well, right, I've come along and, if you'll excuse my French, pissed all over his dream.
No, you know, be completely open with your language.
Which is how it feels, or how it felt anyway. Since then, I've been able to rationalise that and sort of go, well, actually, no, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't doing that. It wasn't at any point a conscious decision. I wasn't sitting there like Mr. Burns plotting to ruin this holiday.
Well, exactly, yeah.
And that's really important, I think, for anybody else out there with an anxiety issue, is you have to absolve yourself of that guilt that comes along with it. If you're in any situation and you're freaking out and it affects other people, it's not your fault that's happened. Which is, as I said in the previous episode, that's different to accepting responsibility for your recovery. You have the power to recover from it, but it isn't your responsibility that it happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's really important just to put a little bit of a crowbar in there and separate those two ideas. Responsibility for the future is not responsibility for the past.
That's a very, 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 very good point. I think that's something we can step onto a little bit further on, actually, because we'll just touch base on a couple of things.
Sure.
about something. So you reckon that would be your top 5 then, all of them?
Any of those. I mean, there were more than 5. They were happening, 2-3 times on a daily basis throughout that entire 2-week period.
God, that's terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. So each and every day I was just a wreck, basically. And they would come out and look, I could be fine, and then walk into a shop or walk down the street and just because I was on such a hair trigger, because there was a build up of anxiety, so my nerves were already frayed by that point. Plus, as we said in the previous episode, when you're on holiday and you're away from home, you're completely out of your comfort zone. There's not really any safe place that you can go where you feel completely secure. And I think also the fact that I'd been to Florida several times previously on family holidays, there was also that extra layer of a sense of responsibility about the whole thing of, I've been here before, I should know the ropes, I should be able to almost protect Andy from anything that may or may not go wrong. Especially with it being his first holiday abroad. And I'd been more of a seasoned traveller when I was a lot younger. Plus, there was also the fact that I'd pretty much saved up all of the holiday money, so it was all in my bank account. So there was all that financial, breaking out that evil phrase, that financial what if.
Yeah.
You know, if anything goes wrong with my bank account, then great, we're stranded 4,000 miles away from home with no backup.
And that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Kind of like one element that you can control, which should effectively help you,
yes,
becomes this burden and becomes something that what if, and becomes the trigger.
Absolutely. So it was really just like a pressure cooker, really, for anybody that had any anxiety issues. And to add an extra layer on there, in the weeks before we went on this holidays, about 2 weeks before or so, we'd also moved house. And that same week, at the time I was working at one of the gyms in the area, and the manager had a week off and given me all the managerial responsibilities. So that same week of moving, I'd also worked 69 hours. So it was really just a whole lot of potential triggers all coming together at once, and of course it was not going to end well. And it's actually around that time when I had a relapse with the bipolar. That was the culmination of that whole thing.
Yeah.
Because I'd been through a period when I'd pretty much been all right with it. It hadn't been too bad. I mean, that I could talk for an entire episode just on the way in which bipolar tends to wax and wane within people. But
and we'll definitely touch upon that in a future episode. Yeah.
As for anxiety issues that I've been able to deal with,
top 5 crowning moments of being able to deal with. Because let's not end that part with a negative, because obviously that's the impactful side of things.
Yeah, that's really, I suppose, sort of saying, well, this is how bad it did get. But I don't think I could actually pick a top 5 specifically. Because over the years there have been that many different ones that they kind of all blur together. But I would say my top ways that I've been able to deal with them, that I have found from experience work, is probably the best way that I can do it. One is not to remove myself from that situation. The longer I'm in a situation which triggers me, what actually happens is I start to relax in the situation.
Yeah.
Because logic starts to kick in, and it starts to go, hang on a minute, you're in this situation that you thought would make you completely lose the plot, freak out, throw up, whatever. You've been in this situation for 10 minutes, 15 minutes now, and it's not happening. That empirical side, which maybe I should explain. If something's empirical, basically it can be proven.
Okay.
It's like you could say empirically the sun's going to rise tomorrow. Look outside. Oh, look, the sun's risen.
Okay.
So it's kind of proving to me that what was worst case scenario actually isn't happening, just by sticking in that situation and sticking it out. And I think that's probably the best thing that I've done. That, and repeatedly putting myself in that situation, which you could call desensitizing yourself to a particular situation. So those are the first 2. The second one is, third one. Don't hold your breath.
Yes.
Don't hold your breath.
I can't breathe, because you're not breathing.
Exactly.
You're holding your breath.
That was always something that I used to. Some people will hyperventilate, as you know, when they're in that situation.
Oh, yeah.
I don't. I hold my breath, and the reason that I do that is because of this fear of vomiting. I think whenever I inhale, it feels like I'm then going to just... bleh. So I would hold my breath and take quite shallow breaths.
Do you not think it's a bit interesting that in the previous episode you mentioned about the first panic attack you ever had, you were feeling nauseous because something you ate disagreed with you, and the fact that you were stuck in a situation where you couldn't get off the bus, the what ifs and all these things, the thing that you said was that you felt you were going to be sick.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it interesting that whenever you get the panic attacks, you feel sick?
Exactly. It's literally just a case of your brain making connections between two unrelated things because they happened at the same time in a really emotionally charged moment.
Mm.
And that's usually actually how things like phobias are formed. For example, my own mum has a raging phobia of daddy long legs, and she can sort of trace it back to a period when she was out walking or playing, and she was in some long grass, and unbeknownst to her there was some barbed wire in the grass, and she basically sat on it.
Really?
Yeah, and you can imagine all these barbs going into the back of your legs. Not particularly pleasant. At that same time, because there was a lot of long grass and it was summer, as she sat down, there were quite a few dead long legs that flew up from the grass.
Yeah, okay.
And then that connection was made between trauma and daddy long legs, and that sort of fused together. It's kind of like a human equivalent of Pavlov's dogs.
The bell. Yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar with that, this psychologist took a load of dogs. Whenever he rang a bell, he would also feed them, and over time they would begin to salivate just at the sound of the bell
because they would associate it with the food. Yeah.
Exactly. So with anxiety and with phobias, what can happen over time is whatever it was that was the original trauma can also almost sort of be cut out. It's like taking out the middleman, so then you just react to something that appears to be completely unrelated. But
it has that hair trigger to the situation.
Exactly.
That initiated the response in the first place.
Precisely.
That is, it's funny because, in a really weird way, because my first panic attack, when I first had one, I started getting tingly hands.
Yeah.
And that can, a number of physiological reasons for that could be from the fact that I was breathing heavily, the fact that I'd been drinking that night quite heavily, the fact that I was tired, the fact that basically the chemicals in my body that were reacting to the stress and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, when you go into a fight or flight response, what your body's going to do is it's going to divert blood flow to muscles that it thinks it's going to need.
Yeah.
So it's going to divert blood flow to your heart, to your lungs, to your legs to get you ready to run. And it sort of diverts it away from things that you might not need, like your stomach, like your extremities in your hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Sorry, my wife just walked in and just waved at us.
That's why you get that sensation of tingling. Also, sometimes nausea with it, because if you've got a full stomach and suddenly your stomach is deprived of blood, the immediate response is, I can't digest this. Quick, let's get it out.
Evacuate it. Yeah, there's a reason I can't digest it.
Precisely. Anyway,
saying? Well, in my first ever panic attack, that was there was that going on, and a very, very close friend of mine had a major stroke. Had a major stroke and almost died. And I'd been to see him in hospital in Leeds, and I connected that to thinking, shit, I'm having a stroke. So now I feel, oh my God, am I going to drop down dead? Am I having some sort of aneurysm or so? So that's where it comes from. So there you go. So yeah, anyway, as I was going to say, just in regards to like the connections and stuff, what are your best coping mechanisms?
My best coping mechanisms? Well, I have two different varieties really that I tend to use. I have short-term and long-term ones.
Okay.
Short-term ones I tend to use in the minute. When I'm in the midst of a panic attack. So go through those first. One is keep breathing. Another one is if there's someone around, talk to them instead of clamming up. Number 3 is to always remember that it's finite. I'm not going to panic for the rest of my life. It is going to end. It's not going to end in some horrific cataclysm. It will just peter out. And that one can be a bit difficult for some people to grasp. But the important thing to remember when you're doing that is it will peter out because it has done every other time. Use evidence of all of your past anxiety experiences, because that is basically what they are. They are little snippets of evidence that you can use in your current situation. Every other time that you've had a panic attack, it has come to an end. For example, in your instance, you haven't had a stroke.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to believe that you will do this time. And if you keep reminding yourself of that, even if at the time, your mind is, going, shut up, you're talking rubbish, I am going to drop down dead. Just keep reaffirming, almost like a mantra to yourself, that that's not going to happen. And if you can verbalise that with someone else that's there, so much the better. Number 4 would be, don't fight it.
Yeah, definitely.
Which might sound a bit weird to some people, but I always find that the more that I try and stave it off, when it gets to a certain point, when it's just beginning, I can kind of breathe and bring myself out of it if it's not that bad. But once it's got a hold, if I then carry on fighting it, I just make it worse. It's a lot easier for me to say, okay, so I'm having a bit of a panic issue at the moment. I'm just going to do steps 1, 2, 3 and work through it that way, because it is happening. And the more that I try and deny it, and the more that I try and sort of say to myself, no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Come on, pull it together, pull your socks up, get on with it. Well, that's just as bad as somebody else saying, you don't have an anxiety issue, pull your socks up. Effectively, you're taking on that role of the sort of person that you wouldn't want to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the other one I would say is probably my best one is just stand outside and just take some fresh air and just breathe. Which is slightly different to breathing full stop. So don't hold your breath if you're in that situation you can't get out of it. If you can get out of it and you can just take a minute and just quieten yourself down, that's so much the better.
Yeah.
Long term, take responsibility for your own recovery. You're
not going to get well just by basically not trying to get help.
Exactly.
Which is why we always advocate GP. Get yourself down to mental health resources in your area, like charities or the community mental health teams, and getting involved with counsellors and things like that. I totally agree.
Completely. When you're in that situation, though, you have all your different appointments that you need to attend. What I always say is, if you have to see a psychiatrist, if you have to have medication, if you have to see a counsellor or a psychotherapist or what have you, don't walk out of your appointments and just forget about it and expect it to be a miraculous recovery. You have to take on board what your therapist is saying and try and apply it to your life all the time.
Yeah,
that's what I mean by taking responsibility. It's kind of the equivalent of, say, if let's say, for example, if somebody had a bad back injury, and you might go to your doctor and they might give you some painkillers and refer you to physiotherapy. You can't just go to your physiotherapy and just do what you do with them there and expect to be turning cartwheels. You have to then take away those techniques and do them every day.
That's exactly it. They've got to apply them to a situation. If you're not applying these things, you're not going to go anywhere.
Precisely. And that's really, in a nutshell, what I mean by taking responsibility for your own recovery. And the next one is don't avoid the situations. The more you avoid a situation, the more power you give it.
Oh yes.
You know?
Oh yeah.
And let's face it, in you know, when it comes to anxiety, you're already feeling quite powerless. So you can take back some of that power. Even if sometimes if you go into those situations and you still feel panicky and you still say, well, you know, okay, I need to take a step back. Don't beat yourself up over that. Don't go, oh, God, I'm such a failure at this. Well, no, nobody's going to, you know, run before they can walk. But if you keep putting yourself into those situations, what you're saying to yourself is, there is nothing frightening about this situation after all. You know,
so there's a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It's pretty much advocating exactly what you're just saying go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not me sort of spouting a theory. This is something that I've done myself.
Same here.
You know, I would be fearful of, you know, various situations. For example, when you first moved into your new house, I was nervous because it was a new place that I hadn't been before. But, you know, I couldn't exactly turn around and say, well, you know, it's been nice knowing you, but now you're in a new house.
I'm never going to know you ever again.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's just impractical. And again, it would be giving power to the anxiety.
Yeah.
So I would have to just, you know, keep coming over. And if I needed to say, step outside, you know, for some fresh air, or in my case, some carcinogens, and just take those 5 minutes.
Yeah.
As and when I needed to, it allowed me to regain control over the situation. And now, obviously, sitting here, and I'm fine with it because over time, evidence and logic has, you know, reaffirmed the fact that there is nothing to be frightened of. So the more that you avoid something which is a trigger for anxiety, the greater that trigger then becomes.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I definitely say that when you're doing these kind of things, it will seriously affect you in such a deeply profound way that, like, you give power to the fear, and therefore you, again, like you say, you cut yourself off from a serious part of your life.
Absolutely.
Some wonderful things. It's really tough. Sometimes you have to give into it because of a situation.
Yep.
Because it's only going to exacerbate. But most of the time you can try, and it is worth trying.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we could speak for hours about anxiety, and we have been. But we're going to very, very briefly touch upon sleeplessness, because this is something as well that we were meaning to do last week. Now, I know that you suffered really badly from insomnia, and I know when I had my really bad bout of depression and anxiety, I had a hell of a time trying to get to sleep. And I mean, like, things, when you have things stuck in your head, like if you have an argument, because I hate falling out with people. If I have an argument, it'll stick in my head, and I will wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that argument still. I'll get really annoyed. I had a recent falling out with some people that I've known for absolutely years. There was a wedding. And to a couple of people that are really, like, lovely people. And what actually happened was there was a wedding, and the individuals who were getting married, one of them had done something really silly about just one of these silly things, and it, again, going back to Facebook, and it had been a post on a Facebook page about something, and it spoilt a TV show for me, and I was really cheesed off. Yeah. But it was connected with several different things. It was like, it wasn't just that person. It was one of those things where they all clicked the same thing, and about 5 different people who have clicked it, and it goes onto your page, and I couldn't avoid it. Yeah. So I was just, I wish people would stop spoiling things. that was it. The next thing I know, I had the fiance of this person get in contact with me and start tearing me a new one via like private message, like going, oh, you've really hurt them, and it's breaking my heart that two people have fallen out. I was like, what now? Falling out. Now, I appreciate the situation. What had actually happened was this person had got pre-wedding stress and everything else, and I appreciate and respect that, and that's fine. And they were very stressed out because they were getting ready to do, because they're really excited about their wedding, and that's cool. They were obviously concerned that there was just going to be a big falling out. There really wasn't. And then it was just kind of like really random stuff, and then I just thought, this is ridiculous. Now, I was going through a lot of stress at the time. I wasn't going to offload on that particular individual because they were obviously stressed. I couldn't tell them there was a bunch of stuff that was going on, both in my private and professional life, some serious stuff that I couldn't just say right, because obviously they were ranting and it wouldn't have helped the situation. So next thing I know, I'm like, okay, don't worry about it. I text them and said, look, is everything okay for me to come to the wedding still and everything else? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine, as long as you want to. I was like, yeah, of course, I love you. Day of the wedding happens, and I start trying to fit into my suit, and my suit tears. And that one reaction starts me having a panic attack. I then start running around, going, oh my god, I've got to replace my suit. And I literally had 5 minutes before I had to go to the wedding, otherwise all of us were going to be late. Yeah. And I started having a panic attack. So through absolute fear of the fact that, like, basically they, I was like, oh my god, I'm a scumbag, I'm a terrible friend, and again you get the negative thoughts, and it starts going around in a cycle. So I'm getting really, really angry at myself. I'm getting angry at the situation. I'm embarrassed because I've put some weight on and my suit is torn. I put the jacket on and it tears, and like nothing's fitting me. I don't have the money to go out and buy a suit straight away, so I'm really, really embarrassed. I start having a bad panic attack, and I'm really freaking out and trying to find anything that will fit properly, which would be suitable for a wedding, which I didn't have anything like that. And then my wife is like, okay, don't worry, I'll take our daughter, myself and daughter, and I'll go and I'll explain the situation. Went to the wedding, sort of explained to a few people on the side, obviously when it was appropriate. And I'm just like, wow, this is really, really bad. So that made me start to lose sleep, and that's a negative knock-on from just a panic attack, and then the sleeplessness of it all. When you try to sleep and you get really angry, especially when you get like for me, I always lose sleep when I'm either anxious about something or something's really twisted me up. It becomes a cycle, becomes even worse.
It really does. For me personally, I can get that same situation that you were in. But additionally, on top of that, bipolar just sort of really, really messes with your sleep. Really messes with it.
Okay.
It tends to work in a slightly different way. Insofar as during a depressed cycle, I will sleep a lot more. Whereas I know that a lot of people with depression, when they are depressed, they have trouble getting sleep, or they'll wake up early, etc., etc. It's almost like a slowing down, like a hibernation sort of sleep. In fact, going back many, many years, from being probably 7 or 8, I would always have these periods of, say, a week or so, every now and again, when I would sleep for about 20 hours a day. I literally just wake up to have a bite to eat every now and again, and then go back to sleep. And yet, no medical tests, no tests for thyroid issues or diabetes or this, that, and the other. They would all come back completely normal. Now, some people would say, well, you can't really apply bipolar to that. But again, a lot of studies have suggested that there are usually some warning signs somewhere if you look hard enough for them. So when I'm in a depressed mood cycle, I will sleep a lot more than usual. when I'm in a hypomanic mood cycle, I won't really go into the definition in between mania and hypomania at the moment because it's a completely separate issue, but sleep is then one of those things that you just don't need. You know, I can stay awake for 3 or 4 days solidly and feel fine. Not only can you not fall asleep, you don't feel as though you need sleep. You know, it's one of those things which just takes up time in which you could be doing one of the 1,000,001 things that your brain is telling you to do at the time. You know, it's like, how can I explain this? When you're hypomanic, your brain is almost like, imagine you're in a nightclub and everyone is trying to talk to you at the same time.
Right. Like complete overstimulus.
Yes, absolutely. So if you can imagine trying to sleep like that while you've had far too much coffee and tomorrow is Christmas Day and you're on a holiday, all at the same time, it's just not going to happen. Which again can have a knock-on effect because you might not feel as though you need that sleep, but it will catch up with you in the end. And as if that wasn't bad enough, if you don't get enough sleep, that in itself can trigger a cycle.
Right, yeah, of course.
You know, what usually happens is if you don't maintain a decent bedtime, which for me is usually between about 12 and 1, or at least it is in summer because it's too hot to sleep before then. But if you don't have that regular time when you can go to sleep and you can at least try and maintain a sleep cycle, it can very easily trigger a hypomanic or a manic episode. It's almost like your brain gets overtired and then goes too far the other way, if that makes any sense. You know how some people say if they get overtired they then suddenly wake up again. It's almost like that sort of that sort of thing. So there are those things going on. Plus, I also tend to get the same thing that you do, whereby if there is a stressful situation going on, obviously I can't sleep then, which I think is something that probably a lot of people actually get.
Oh yeah, it's very, 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 very common.
Absolutely.
But that's the problem. When you become self-involved with the anxiety, you want to, and the sleeplessness, you want to, and that perpetuates the anxiety and the paranoia and the frustration of the situation.
Absolutely.
You want to make it up to the people and that you love them and you want to tell them that, but you can't, because at the same time it comes out like a gibbering madman, and at the same time you're taking ownership of their frustrations at you. When there's a lack of understanding, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you can understand the situation, it doesn't, you can understand it.
I mean, one of the things that is quite important to remember is that with things such as anxiety, if you have an anxiety disorder, it wouldn't be called a disorder if it wasn't serious.
Yeah, exactly.
It wouldn't be categorized as something which requires professional help if it was just something and nothing. If somebody was just being awkward, then it wouldn't have literature on it. It wouldn't have recommended treatment plans, etc., etc., etc. And whether or not someone understands it, that does not give them the right to belittle it. I don't particularly understand astrophysics, but I'm not going to sit here and bitch about it.
Yeah, well,
because I don't know any astrophysics jokes. But or for example, I've never had going back to the previous episode, I suppose I've never experienced anorexia. Yeah. But I do have a husband who has, and consequently, if we are due to say go out for a meal with somebody, I know, that just because he is a regular weight now and just because he eats now, that there is still that stress on there because of that situation.
Oh yeah.
And just because I don't have anorexia and have never had anorexia, that does not then give me the right to turn around and say, "Oh, stop being a diva."
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the same goes for anybody who doesn't have a mental illness. Just because you don't have it does not give you the right to belittle it.
And not just with mental illness, just mental health issues. It's with anything. For example, I mean, that'd be like me turning around having a go at somebody who has a heart valve defect.
Absolutely.
The only difference is, like you quite rightly put out, is the fact that with people with and the reason I say heart valve defect, let me just reiterate why that. Maybe because they have lower energy, or they need to rest up, so they can't do something physically because of that. And the only reason that isn't seen in a bad, like not a bad way, but like people are less to get prone to be attacked for that, is because it's something physical, rather than the mental. And sometimes you have to kind of justify, if you know you have these disorders, you know you have something like that, sometimes you have to kind of have an argument with yourself and try and justify it. You can try and push yourself in that situation, go, no, I've got to do it for them, I've got to do it for them. But if it's exacerbating a situation, making it worse, the last thing you then have to start being a bit logical, going, right, it's not just going to be me now who's going to be late. It's going to be my wife, the knock-on effect, like my wife, my daughter, so nobody will be able to turn up, and that's not fair. And they're all ready. Then on top of that, if I'm there and I'm dressed inappropriately, I don't want to cast bad feelings over, make things look bad for the people that put so much organisation and effort into something. Then on top of that, you're kind of like, what state am I going to be when I get there? Am I going to be this gibbering wreck? Am I going to be, oh my god, I'm so sorry, and everything else. And then what happens then is the people that are having their day, it's kind of like an emotional mathematics. You then kind of go, well, or for whatever reason, you don't want it to be in a thing when it's all about, sort of in a weird selfish way, when becomes about you rather than the people that you love having a good day, and that's the last thing you'd want to do. So it kind of it goes back on itself. It's one of those things, and it's hard because people can either assume they understand or try and understand, but it's a very difficult one. And I understand the difficulty with people understanding it, because it can be it's a very big minefield of situations, and it's hard to wrap your head around to understand how a thought process with somebody
absolutely
works.
I mean, what I have done for a while now, what works for me anyway, is whenever I'm meeting new people, as soon as the opportunity arises, I will say, look, I have this condition, whatever, and these are some of the limitations that I have, and in those situations I will do my best, but you have to give me some leeway, as you would with anybody, and if I have to cancel at the last minute, I'm sorry, but that's what I have to do, because I, to a certain degree, have to adapt my life around these conditions that are not going to go away. So, moving things on slightly, what are your, say, top 5 tips for actually getting to sleep at night?
Oh, well, okay. Well, because we have gone kind of a bit of a tangent regarding stress and anxiety and stuff. And like, going back from that, and it was a roundabout way of talking about being sleeplessness. Now, for me, when I've tried to get into sleep, if you've got something on your mind, like, for example, like I had, you can't sleep. And if that plays on your head, you're not going to be able to deal with it. I find writing it all down, because it's almost like you can physically see the information and you can process it there and then, with the added bonus that you're not ringing up somebody that you've had an argument with and going, well, you know what, fuck you, because because you're twisted up, you're anxious, you're angry at the situation, you're embarrassed, whatever, it all balls up. It's best just to write it all down and go, right, okay, I've got to do this and this, and not go on Facebook and send them a message and go, you know what, fuck you, because again, that's not going to be productive in the slightest. The most sensible thing to do is kind of just write it down. That I find, once you do that, it's almost like you process that information. That information then dissipates. Not totally, it will come back, but you'll be calmer enough to hopefully get your head down and fall asleep.
Absolutely.
I find if you're messing around with gadgets, I'm terrible for this. If you're a gadget messing around or in bed, as in you're picking up your smartphones. There's a couple of I've come very close to getting rid of my smartphones, getting a really cheap, shitty handset, and going good, because then I can't surf the internet on it. I can't do this, that, and the other on it, and then that's it. You know, it's a phone rather than have something like that. And I've got a tablet which I use to read my comics, because then it's easy for storage and whatnot. And again, but it's my nerdy nature. I like reading comics, so I'll be reading stuff in bed. Now, obviously, essentially what you're doing, you're looking at a TV screen. And essentially what you're doing is you're still processing information, so your brain gets worn out more.
Absolutely, and it's stimulating.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. And so when you try and go to sleep, it's this stuff still spinning around in your head and messing with your head. So I would definitely say just try and avoid that, or if you do still read on a tablet like myself, just basically be aware of what you're doing and go, right, now it's time to put it down.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be, you know, you can, if you're going to bed at a certain time, you want to be asleep by a certain time, maybe, you know, set yourself a little alarm to tell you when to put it down. That's
a good idea, very good idea. I often find as well, sometimes you can't, your mind won't switch off, and nothing might not have happened, your just mind won't switch off because you're overtired. So you kind of like, and it sounds really stupid, but it's kind of like that broken record in your head, and the sort of imagery, the same imagery keeps flashing in your head if you play computer games all day and then you try to sit down and you've got the same. I remember when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, and I was at university and I was ill, and I basically couldn't leave my room because I was having really bad flu, and all I was doing was I was waking up, playing Grand Theft Auto for about 6-7 hours, falling asleep, having fever dreams in my head with the music or lines of dialogue going over and over in my head, waking up and playing. It was almost like hell, because it was the only thing. So like that's where overstimulus can really mess with your head. You've got to be so careful with that.
Absolutely.
Caffeine drinks. I know this is ironic because like stimuli, because we've stopped this to make another episode to go for tea and cigarettes and whatever your poison is, you know. So it's kind of like, it's a bit ironic, but we are, you know, it is like 2 PM. So you kind of, stimulants really don't do you any good, because obviously you're wired on caffeine and things.
Absolutely.
So let's see, stimulants. Writing down any particular issue so you can process them better, and do it in a less emotionally charged way.
Absolutely.
That, because when you're angry, like going back to the situation I had, I was so angry about the misunderstanding, angry at myself, embarrassed, angry at the fact that my friends were frustrated with me and they didn't understand, and I was so angry about it. I was kind of like, oh shit, and it's just this big misunderstanding. Because that had happened, the frustration then becomes so emotionally charged that you need to distance yourself. Absolutely. And that's where the writing down comes in useful. So writing down helps process that.
I suppose as an extension of that, what you could do is, you know, when you're writing things down, just itemize it a little bit. You know, what's the problem? Just put it down in a single sentence. What can I do about it? Again, single sentence that you can do tomorrow. And you know what? If you can't come up with something that you can do about it, just cast it on one side, because there's nothing worse than mulling over something that you can do nothing about.
Yeah, and you know what? Another good way of doing that's a good idea is when you have a single word sentence. How's that word? A single sentence. When you have a single sentence that basically explains the situation at real basic. Friends are angry at me, or I'm frustrated. Put it into kind of like, you know, like the spider diagrams, like a cloud one where you put a cloud around it and then you point arrows and go why, you know, so you're breaking it down the situation to bite-sized things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you say, kind of like the bullet points. That's another way of doing it, because then when you look at it, you see all. It's interesting in the respect that you look at that single sentence and you see what the problem is, and you see all the little what ifs that have come from it, and then you realise all that has been in your head. And that's what you've been messing around with, going, well, actually, this, and this, and this.
Exactly.
And that's helped you lose sleep.
Completely. Because when it's still in your head, you have a wood for the tree situation.
Yeah,
Because you are in the eye of the storm. And it's very difficult to come up with a solution when you have all that. Yeah, no solution, no sleep. And then, as I think as you were saying earlier on, one of the things that happens is if you don't get enough sleep, you end up with a higher amount of something called cortisol in your system, which is
stress hormone, isn't it? Yeah.
So then you're on an even shorter fuse, and
and the knock-on effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have writing down your problems, avoiding caffeinated drinks, ditching the electrical gadget stimulations, etc.
Yep. 2 more. My top 5.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Now, this sounds really bizarre, right? Because right now I'm a bit of a flabby mess. But exercise helps. Go for a walk. Doing those kind of things, doing a walk like that, tire yourself out before bed. Because if you're
too late though.
Not too late, because if you do that, you wait. Because the problem is, like when you've done an initial workout, you get knackered, and then you get a sudden burst of energy about like sort of 20-30 minutes later, and then you're like, oh no. So obviously not too late. So I'm talking about early evening. I don't know. Say you finish work at 5, you do a bit of a workout or whatever. You finish around about 7, 8. Then about 10 o'clock you go to bed. You know, that kind of thing. That's always useful. Having a routine really helps. The one thing that I've been really thankful for is my current role in my job. There's been a lot of routine where there used to be lots of shift work. Currently there has been very fixed shifts.
Yes.
And because of the fixed shifts, that's really helped, because you know exactly where you stand. You know when you're going to have your days off. You know you're going to get by a certain time. You have the evening to yourself. It's not a case of you start work and you're like waiting to start work, and then you drive all the way to work, and then you're at work for 9 hours or whatever. So that's always useful. So having that set routine and a bit of exercise really does help.
I mean, there are so many aspects to thought patterns and behaviour which are possible to be conditioned and trained. So many, be it positive or negative. You know, like a good sleep routine, or as we were saying before, these anxiety connections. It's all effectively the same thing. It's this form of conditioning. So if you have that routine whereby you say to yourself, well, I'm going to go to bed at 10 o'clock every night, no exceptions. So if there's a program coming on that you want to watch, just record it, you know, and start to get that specific routine. And what will actually happen is your brain and your body will begin to accept that sort of routine and begin to get tired around that time of night, because it expects that routine of you getting into bed.
Definitely. And that is the falling into the same routine, that pattern. You won't notice it first, but when it starts kicking in, then you suddenly go, actually, this is really working. This is really helpful.
And it's one of those things that you should persevere with, because, you know, speaking from experience with things such as conditioning in the past, I could be really dismissive of it. For example, I'm not ashamed to admit that for years and years and years, if somebody said to me, you should go to a psychologist, I just, how are they going to do? Give them the drugs, just make it go away.
Oh, that's definitely one thing you always think about, isn't it?
But conditioning and talking and using these different ways of altering how your mind works and how your mind and body interacts are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than all the drugs out there.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
They don't have any side effects, which could be an entire episode in itself.
I think that will be a future episode. There's a like, and just very briefly as well, something we haven't touched upon with sleeplessness, because obviously you have the sleeplessness when we've discussed sleeplessness when you have something on your mind. We've discussed sleeplessness because of stimulation and things. Interesting one.
Right.
Sleeplessness because of medication. What would your guide be to put into that? Because you've suffered so much insomnia because of medication and things.
Yes. In fact, I had quite a catch-22 situation in the fact that some of the medication that I was on, if it was over a certain dose, I couldn't sleep. If it was under that dose, it wasn't addressing the symptoms properly.
Oh man.
So it was really a rock and a hard place sort of situation. What I'd suggest to most people is, if it's a new medication and you've only been on it a couple of weeks, stick with it, because it could be a side effect that goes away after all, once your body gets used to it.
Definitely.
Secondly, is it an insomnia which is really having an impact on your life? You know, if it's the sort of thing whereby you've gone from having a decent night's sleep to being awake at 2-3 o'clock in the morning and then wide awake again at 6 or 7 in the morning, which is pretty much what I used to be like. You know, because you know, if you have that sort of thing going on, it is going to impact your physical and mental health, because you know, if you're too tired to do anything, you then become more isolated, blah blah blah. If that's the case, then you need to think about, you know, contacting your GP or your psychiatrist and really addressing it and saying, you know, is there something that can either be added to it, potentially? I know a lot of people are dubious about adding any other medications. Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not. Don't, whatever you do, just stop taking it. Seriously, I know a lot of people have done this sort of thing in the past, because some of the medications, not just insomnia, but they can have a ton of different side effects which are really unpleasant sometimes. But they can also have what's known as discontinuation syndromes, which are a different set of symptoms which can be just as unpleasant and in some cases dangerous if you just stop taking them. So don't just stop taking these medications. But have a word with your GP or with your psychiatrist, or you know, your therapist, and you know, be completely honest with them. Say, you know, I've been having this side effect. It's been there for, you know, X amount of time. Is it going to go away with time? If so, how long? Because it's really having an impact on my life. If it's not going to go away, then I want to discuss changing it. And that's one thing that is really important to say. If you're talking with a professional, sometimes, and I speak from experience, I know there are a lot of wonderful people out there in the mental health service, don't get me wrong, but I personally have come across some who will effectively say, if it's controlling your symptoms, then put up with the side effects and go away.
Yeah, that's not conducive to any sort of healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely.
Is it?
So if you come up against that sort of situation, then stand your ground. You know, it's a slightly different situation, but a personal story that I have in mind. I was on a particular medication which is called quetiapine or Seroquel. It's an antipsychotic medication, and it did not suit me at all. Did not suit me. So I discussed it with my psychiatrist, who basically said, just give it a go. And I actually had to sit down and say, no, this is not suiting me. This is not improving my quality of life. It's making it worse. Get it changed, because I'm not putting up with it. I know that you're the professional, but I'm the one that's having to deal with it. You know, and sometimes you do have to stand up to people if your medication is causing severe insomnia, as some antidepressants will do, or if it's having another side effect and you don't feel as though you're getting the response that you want, or you feel as though you're being brushed off, you have every right to a second opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. But please get that second opinion. Don't just stop taking it.
Yeah, that's very, very wise words. Never just stop taking something like that, because that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Absolutely. And again, you know, if you're in a situation whereby you've been given a medication and you think it's causing insomnia, still go through the checklist that you discussed. Yeah.
Because there could be something else that you're doing. For example, if you've been particularly depressed and you're given an antidepressant medication, and suddenly you've got interest in things again, or you're developing interest in things, maybe you're doing more. Look at that. If you suddenly got this urge, you know, maybe you've got an interest in your favourite television programme again, and you've been watching that till 11 o'clock at night or whatever. in a way that you weren't doing before you were on your medication, well, that could be having an extra effect. So there could be many things going on. So still go through that checklist that we discussed earlier. And then if that's not helping, and if you're getting, say, 2-3 weeks in, and those side effects are not going away, then start thinking about having a word with your mental health professionals.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Wow. So that's your 2-episode extravaganza, almost 3 hours worth of podcasting there for you folks.
It's like half of Lord of the Rings installment.
Yeah, you go. I've really enjoyed this episode.
Absolutely.
And I know that everybody, all the listeners, are going to really enjoy having you, your advice here, Danny. So I'm going to say that obviously Danny's going to be a regular guy who appears, throughout the episodes and stuff, because I think he's got a lot to say, and always another guest who I'll happily have on the show, because he's got a lot to say and he's got a lot of knowledge and background. I think everybody could gain a lot of sort of valuable knowledge from as well, just from his experiences. So we'll do again. I think definitely touch upon the medication side of thing. I think that's an episode in itself. I think that's a really good one. And I think
it's such a minefield.
Yeah.
And even with all the science like that, it's still a lot of trial and error getting the right stuff.
Well, yeah, it's trial and error, like any medication. It's working which way around it, except for instead of just like, I don't know, instead of like inhaler sort of medication where you feel a bit more restless or because of your symptoms of the asthma, it's obviously your main behaviours that get changed from the medication. So it's always definitely worth an episode or two, that is. And I think as well, I think because we've touched upon it in here, I think the negative experiences people may have experienced with misunderstandings on mental health and things are a really good one. So I think that's definitely one we'll open out to the audience and get a lot of feedback on, because I think that's definitely a good one. So what we're going to do, we're going to play out. Now, I played a song in the last episode called This Swirling World. That was by Robin Blackmore, and you can find his stuff on Robin Blackmore Music in SoundCloud, which is very good. He's a fantastic singer. I have him on all the time on the show. I'm playing the song again because I'm still playing with the idea of keeping this as a regular end music, because I really like it's called You're Not Alone in This Swirling World. It's a fantastic song, and I think we'll have that on just coming in a few seconds. But before we go, just remember, if you have any feedback, or you would like to guest on the show, or you'd like to put some music forward, or you'd like to say poem or shout out to any podcasts or any creative stuff that you're doing, because it's really, really important having a creative output, you can catch us by sending an email to panicstationsuk@yahoo.co.uk. Don't forget to check the official website, which is now up, www.panicstationsuk.com. Obviously from there you can read blogs, and you can also send your own blogs back to panicstationsuk@yahoo.co.uk, so we can put them on the website for personal stories that you have gone through. Again, it's all about supporting one another. So until next week, be safe, have a lot of fun, remember you're not alone, okay? And this is Robin Blackmore with You're Not Alone in this swirling world. Goodbye.
Wake up, dry your eyes, time to face the long night with a brave smile. Dive headfirst into the dark with your shaking hands clenched in a soldier's heart. I know where you've been, I know where you've been. You're not alone in this swirling world. You have my hand. have of my hand. Wake up, dry your eyes, time to face a long night with a brave smile. Dive headfirst into the dark with your shaking hands clenched in a soldier's heart. I know where you've been, I know